All right, little dude. Is this better? There's a stream now. Okay. This is better. All right. Well, I'm gonna jump down to the streaming channel. But I'm glad I can make your night. And that was me getting chastised by the little dude. He jumped in and he's like, "Why is there no stream yet?" Calling me out. That's what I get for showing up late. It's not even the latest I've been. Honestly, I wasn't feeling well. I wasn't 100% that I was going to stream or not. Been feeling off all morning. But figured I'd jump on and we'd finish Arabian Nights and clear the way for starting a new novel. We did just start a new novel in the subscriber read. We started reading Shogun by James Clavell, which is an amazing, amazing book. And yeah, he didn't. He just popped right in. He was like, "Why is there no stream?" In, little kid tones. Totally called out. Savage. Your son took me to task, Vela. Well, he might live by my stream schedule. Oh, that is... That's endearing and complimentary and probably awful. Well, if that's true, I am sorry for being less than 100% reliable over the last month or so. Maybe slightly more than a month. I probably won't talk about it when you're in the stream, little dude, but sometimes life runs you over and leaves scars behind. Then you're left dealing with them for years. The worst supercomputer. Well, I mean, supercomputer hit by a truck. So, you get what you get. Hey, Sparky. Glad you're here, Panda. Sparky, thank you for coming. It's always nice to see you guys here. I have tea. I've got Peoples. I got a good book. Although, I admit, the current story bugged me a bit. Let's just say that dosing somebody without their knowledge and against their will, and then carrying out shenanigans that impact their mental health hits a little close to home. So, not at all something I approve of. All right. Do you want to start with a poem? Let's start with a poem. Let's find something. I almost brought down my collected works of Lord Byron. Let's see. Sorry, flipping through collect poetry. Oh, you'd like some Byron? Okay. Well, in the vein of there always being more time, let's go with Robert Herrick. To the virgins to make much of time. Gather ye rosebuds while ye may. Old time is still a-flying, and this same flower that smiles today, tomorrow will be dying. The glorious lamp of heaven, the sun, the higher he's a-getting, the sooner will his race be run, and nearer he's to setting. That age is best which is the first, when youth and blood are warmer, but being spent the worse, and worst times still succeed the former. Then be not coy, but use your time, and while you may go marry, for having lost but once your prime, you may forever tarry. And then Anne Bradstreet, to my dear and loving husband. If ever two were one, then surely we. If ever man were loved by wife, then thee. If ever wife was happy in a man, compare with me, ye woman, if you can. I prize thy love more than whole mines of gold, or all the riches that the east doth hold. My love is such that rivers cannot quench, nor aught but love from thee give recompense. Thy love is such I can no way repay. The heavens reward thee manifold, I pray. Then while we live, in love let's so persevere, that when we live no more, we may live ever. Aw, it was sweet and not at all snarky. It's kind of nice to read something that's not biting and snarky. Not that I ever read stuff like that. All right. We were reading the tale of Abu Hassan, the man that the Caliph kept tricking into thinking that he was the Caliph for a day. All right. So he had kidnapped him a second time. When they arrived at the palace, the Caliph ordered Abu Hassan to be laid on a sofa in the hall, from whence he had been carried home fast asleep a month before. But first he bade the attendants to put on him the same habit in which he had acted as Caliph, which was done. He then charged all the officers and ladies... Okay, I'll screen change. I'm sorry. There we go. Is that better? I noticed the 8-ball. Yeah, it does look pretty cool. You know, the image quality would get even better if I were to upgrade my operating system. Because it's a 4K camera, but right now it's clamped at 1080 because of the operating system. Because Windows 7 doesn't support the 4K camera. What do you think? Should I upgrade? Cough, dinosaur, cough, cough. Thanks. But first he bade the attendants to put on him the same habit in which he had acted as Caliph, which was done. He then charged all the officers, ladies, and musicians who were in the hall when he drank the last glass of wine, which had put him to sleep, to be there by daybreak, and to take care to act their part well when the visitor should wake. He then retired to rest, charging Mesrar to awake him before they went into the hall, that he might conceal himself in the closet as before. Things being thus disposed, and the Caliph's powder having had its effect, Abu Hassan began to awake without opening his eyes. At that instant, the 7 bands of singers joined their voices to the sounds of hautboys, fifes, flutes, and other instruments, forming a very agreeable concert. Abu Hassan was greatly surprised to hear the delightful harmony. But when he opened his eyes and saw the ladies and officers about him, whom he thought he recognized, his amazement increased. Wait, what? Hang on, let me allow that. I had to add the permitted term dinosaur. It tried to block dinosaur because it was hostile. Blocked for reason hostility. Dinosaur. Oh, man. That's kind of funny. I wonder what other terms I can be blocking. Not that I'm suggesting you try it out, because I'm not. Okay. So, but when he opened his eyes and saw the ladies and officers about him, whom he thought he recognized, his amazement increased. The hall that he was in seemed to be the same he had seen in his first dream, and he observed the same lustres and the same furniture and ornaments. He was, however, too frightened to regain all his faculties at once. "God have mercy upon me," he exclaimed, "for I am possessed of the evil spirit." The lords tried to convince him that he was the victim of an unpleasant dream. "Sir," cried he, "see my back. Are these marks, then, imaginary? I tell you I can feel the pain of the blows come still. Come hither and bite my ear that I may feel if I am awake." One of the slaves stepped forward and obeyed, whereupon Abu Hassan screamed, but was still mystified. The band immediately struck up, and all the attendants began to dance round the sofa on which Abu Hassan sat. Seeing among the ladies some that he recognized, Abu Hassan threw off his royal robes and joined in the dance, jumping and cutting capers with the others. So amused was the caliph that he put his head into the room and cried out, Abu Hassan, have you mind to cause my death from laughing?" As soon as the caliph's voice was heard, everybody was silent, and Abu Hassan among the rest, who, turning his head to see from whence the voice came, knew the caliph, and in him recognized the Mosul merchant, but was not in the least daunted. On the contrary, he became convinced that he was awake, and that all that had happened to him had been real and not a dream. He entered into the caliph's pleasantry. "Ha ha," said he, looking at him with good assurance. "You are a merchant of Mosul, and complain that I would kill you. I see the whole thing now. But nay, tell me what you did to make me insensible, or else I shall always feel that I am half mad." The caliph then told him all that had happened during the unnatural sleep, and how it was accomplished. "I have a desire to know how my people live," said he, "and therefore often wander about the city in disguise. It was thus that I came to your house, and hearing you express a wish to have royal power for a day, I decided to grant your wish. I never thought that my acquiescence would lead to so much trouble, but I am prepared to make every return in my power, not only as your due, but because I have proved that you are a man of high qualities. Ask what you will, and I shall grant it." "Commander of the faithful," replied Abu Hassan, how great soever my tortures may have been, they are all blotted out of my remembrance, since I understand my sovereign lord and master had a share in them. And since I may make a request, I would ask to be allowed to enjoy the happiness of admiring, all my lifetime, your virtues." The caliph was much pleased by this speech, and ordered Abu Hassan to be given whatever he wanted, and to come to him whenever he wished. Abu Hassan suitably expressed his obligation, and returned home to tell his mother all that had taken place, and how his previous experience had been no empty dream. The caliph was much delighted by Abu Hassan, whose society he constantly desired. He also brought him to his wife Zebedee, who was greatly entertained by the history of his adventures. She often expressed a wish to see him, and noticing that whenever he came, he had his eyes always fixed upon one of her slaves, called Nuzhatul Adawat, resolved to tell the caliph of it. "Commander of the faithful," said she one day, "you do not observe that every time Abu Hassan attends in your visits to me, he never keeps his eyes off Nuzhatul Adawat, and she seems to respond to his advances. If you approve of it, we will make a match between them and celebrate their nuptials here in the palace." "Madam," replied the caliph, "if Nuzhatul Adawat is willing to accept Abu Hassan as a husband, I see no obstacle. Let them decide at once, since they are both present." Abu Hassan threw himself at the caliph's and Zebedee's feet to show the appreciation he had of their goodness, and rising up said, I cannot receive a wife from better hands, but dare not hope that Nuazatol will give me her hand as readily as I give her mine. At these words he looked at the princess slave, who showed by her respectful silence and the sudden blush that arose in her cheeks that she was disposed to obey the caliph and her mistress Zebedee. Sorry, gotta get the pages. The rejoicings at the weddings lasted for many days, and both Zebedee and the caliph gave the newly married couple very handsome presents. Abu Hassan found his wife all that he desired, and she was equally pleased with him. In fact, they suited each other admirably. After the feastings and merrymakings, Abu Hassan and his wife settled down to live in great luxury. They spared no expense on the entertainments they gave, and so extravagantly did they spend money that scarcely a year after the wedding they found themselves penniless. In their need, Abu Hassan said to his wife, I was sure that you would not fail me in a business which concerns us both, and therefore I must tell you, this want of money has made me think of a plan which will supply us, at least for a time. It consists in a little trick we must play, I upon the caliph, and you upon Zebedee, and, as it will, I am sure, divert them both greatly, it will answer advantageously for us. You and I will both die. Not I, indeed, interrupted Nuzatal Aduat. You may die by yourself, if you please, but I am not so weary of this life, and whether you are pleased or not, will not die so soon. If you have nothing else to propose, you may die by yourself, for I assure you I shall not join you. You are a woman of such vivacity and wonderful quickness, replied Abu Hassan, that you scarcely give me time to explain my design. Have but a little patience, and you shall find that you will be ready enough to die such a death as I intend, for surely you could not think I meant a real death. Well, said his wife, if it is but a sham death you design, I am at your service, and you may depend on my zeal to second you in this manner of dying. But I must tell you truly, I am very unwilling to die as I apprehended you at first to mean. Be but silent a little, said Abu Hassan, and I will tell you what I promise. I will feign dead myself, and you shall lay me out in the middle of my chamber, with my turban upon my face, my feet toward Mecca, as if ready to be carried out to burial. When you have done this, you must lament and weep bitterly, as is usual in such cases. Tear your clothes and hair, or pretend to do it, and go all in tears with your locks disheveled to Zebedee. The princess will of course inquire the cause of your grief, and when you have told her, with words intermixed with sobs, she will pity you, give you money to defray the expense of my funeral, and a piece of rich brocade to cover my body, that my interment may be the more magnificent, and to make you a new dress in the place of the one you will have torn. As soon as you return, I will rise, lay you in my place, and go and act the same part with the caliph, who I dare say will be as generous to me as Zebedee will have been to you. This plan commended itself to Nuzatal Aduat, and she at once acted upon her husband's suggestion, and placed him as he desired, pulled off the headdress, and went straight to Zebedee, weeping and mourning. She poured out her woes to the sympathetic princess, who was deeply grieved when she heard of Abu Hassan's death. After the two women had sorrowed together, the princess ordered her slaves to give Nuzatal Aduat a purse of gold and a rich piece of brocade to cover the body, and bade her have no fear for the future, that she would take care of her. As soon as Nuzatal Aduat got out of the princess's presence, she dried up her tears and returned with joy to Abu Hassan to give him an account of her good success. When she came home, she burst out laughing on seeing her husband still stretched out in the middle of the floor. She ran to him, bade him rise and see the fruits of his stratagem. He arose and rejoiced with his wife at the sight of the purse and brocade. Unable to contain herself at the success of her artifice, she cried, Come, husband, let me act the dead part, and see if you can manage the caliph as well as I have done Zebedee. That is the temper of all women, replied Abu Hassan, who we may well say have always the vanity to believe they can do things better than men, though at the same time what good they do is by their advice. It would be odd indeed if I, who laid this plot myself, could not carry it out as well as you. But let us lose no time in idle discourse. Lie down in my place, and witness if I do not come off with as much applause. Abu Hassan wrapped up his wife as she had done him, and with his turban unrolled, like a man in the greatest affliction, ran to the Caliph, who was holding a private council. He presented himself at the door, and the officer, knowing he had free access, opened it. He entered, holding with one hand his handkerchief before his eyes, to hide the feigned tears, which trickled down his cheeks, and striking his breast with the other, with exclamations expressing extraordinary grief. The Caliph, surprised at seeing Abu Hassan in such a plight, asked the cause of his grief, and when he heard that Nuzhatul Aduat was dead, he expressed his grief in becoming words. He also bade the vizier present Abu Hassan with a purse of gold and some rich cloth, just as Zebedee had done for Nuzhatul Aduat. Abu Hassan prostrated himself before the Caliph and thanked him for his kindness. Then, taking the gifts, he hurried back to his house, greatly pleased by the success of his scheme. Nuzhatul Aduat, weary with lying so long in one posture, waited not till Abu Hassan bade her rise, but as soon as she heard the door open, sprang up, ran to her husband, and asked him if he had imposed on the Caliph as cleverly as she had done on Zebedee. "You see," said he, showing her the stuff, and shaking the purse, "that I can act as sorrowful husband for a living wife, as well as you can a weeping widow for a husband not dead." Abu Hassan, however, was not without his fears that this double plot might be attended with some ill consequences. He thought it would not be amiss to put his wife on her guard as to what might happen, that they might act in concert. "For," added he, "the better we succeed in embarrassing the Caliph and Zebedee, the more they will be pleased at last, and perhaps may show their satisfaction by greater liberality." This last consideration induced them to carry on their stratagem further. The Caliph, though he had important affairs to decide, was so impatient to condole with the princess on the death of her slave, that he rose up as soon as Abu Hassan was gone, and went to Zebedee's apartment. "Madam," said he, "allow me to express my deep sorrow for the loss you have sustained by the death of Nuzhatul Aduat." "Commander of the Faithful," replied Zebedee, "you are mistaken. It is Abu Hassan who is dead, not Nuzhatul Aduat." "Excuse me, madam," said the Caliph, "you are wrong. Abu Hassan is alive and well." Zebedee was much piqued at this dry answer of the Caliph. "Commander of the Faithful," replied she, "give me leave to repeat to you once more that it is Abu Hassan who is dead, and that my slave, Nuzhatul Aduat, his widow, is living. All my women who wept with me can bear me witness, and tell you also that I made her a present of 100 pieces of gold and a piece of brocade. The grief which you found me in was on account of the death of her husband, and just at the instant you entered, I was going to send you a compliment of condolence." At these words of Zebedee, the Caliph cried out in a fit of laughter, "This, madam, is a strange piece of obstinacy, but you may depend upon Nuzhatul Aduat's being dead." "I tell you no, sir," replied Zebedee sharply. "It is Abu Hassan that is dead, and you shall never make me believe otherwise." The Caliph at once ordered the vizier to go and find out the truth of the matter at Abu Hassan's house. When Masrar had departed, he said to Zebedee, "You will see in a moment which of us is right. So convinced am I that I will bet my garden of pleasures against your palace of paintings, though the one is worth much more than the other." They solemnly vowed to abide by the bet, and anxiously awaited Masrar's return. While the Caliph and Zebedee were disputing so earnestly and with so much warmth, Abu Hassan, who foresaw their difference, was very attentive to whatever might happen. As soon as he perceived Masrar through a window, at which he sat talking with his wife, and observed that he was coming directly to their apartment, he guessed his commission, and bade his wife make haste to act the dead part once more, as they had agreed, without loss of time. But they were so pressed that Abu Hassan had much ado to wrap up his wife, and lay the piece of brocade which the Caliph had given him upon her, before Masrar reached the house. This done, he opened the door of his apartment, and with a melancholy, dejected countenance, and his handkerchief before his eyes, went and sat down at the head of the pretended deceased. "Hey, Gecko, welcome. I'm glad you're here." This satisfied Masrar, who hastened back to report the result of his inquiries to the Caliph. The Caliph was highly delighted, and laughed long when he heard the tidings. "You hear, madam," said he. "You have lost your bet." I'm glad you're not missing another one. That makes me really happy. Zebedee, however, would not accept Mizrah's unsupported testimony, and, as she disputed the wager, it was agreed to send her nurse to see whether Abu Hassan was really dead. But as Abu Hassan was watching at the window, he was prepared to take his place on the couch directly. He saw the nurse approaching, so that by the time she reached the apartment, Nuzhat al-Adawat had completed the task of laying him out and stood mourning by his side. The nurse stayed only to offer her condolences, and then started back to the palace as fast as she could. As soon as she was gone, Nuzhat al-Adawat wiped her eyes and released Abu Hassan. They both went and sat on a sofa against the window, expecting what would be the end of this stratagem, and to be ready to act according as circumstances might require. The nurse's report only complicated matters, as both the Caliph and the princess were convinced of the rectitude of their messengers, and, as neither would give way, they agreed to go together to see for themselves. Accordingly, they arose and sallied forth, accompanied by their attendants. When Abu Hassan perceived them coming, he told his wife, who was very frightened. "What shall we do?" said she. "We are ruined." "Fear nothing," replied Abu Hassan. "Have you forgotten already what we agreed on? We will both feign ourselves dead, and you shall see all will go well. At the slow rate they are coming, we shall be ready before they reach the door." Accordingly, Abu Hassan and his wife wrapped up and covered themselves with the pieces of brocade, and waited patiently for their visitors. Mizrar, who came first, opened the door, and the Caliph and Zebedee, followed by their attendants, entered the room. But they were struck with horror at the spectacle which presented itself to their view, not knowing what to think. At length, Zebedee, breaking silence, said to the Caliph, "Alas, they are both dead." "You have done much," continued she, looking at the Caliph and Mizrar, "to endeavor to make me believe that my dear slave was dead. And I find it true. Grief at the loss of her husband has certainly killed her." "Say, rather," answered the Caliph, prepossessed to the contrary, "that Nuzhat al-Adawat died first. The afflicted Abu Hassan sank under his grief, and could not survive his dear wife. You ought, therefore, to confess that you have lost your wager, and that your palace of paintings is mine." "Hold there," answered Zebedee, warmed at being contradicted by the Caliph. "I will maintain that you have lost your garden of pleasures. Abu Hassan died first, since my nurse told you, as well as me, that she saw her alive, and weeping for the death of her husband." "I will give 1,000 pieces of gold to him who can tell me which of these two died first," replied the Caliph. No sooner were those words out of the Caliph's mouth than he heard a voice under Abu Hassan's piece of brocade say, "Commander of the Faithful, I died first. Give me the 1,000 pieces of gold." At the same instant, Abu Hassan threw off the piece of brocade, and springing up, prostrated himself at his feet, while his wife did the same to Zebedee. The princess at first shrieked out, but recovering herself, expressed great joy to see her dear slave rise again, just when she was almost inconsolable at having seen her dead. "Ah, wicked Nuzhat al-Adawat," cried she, "what have I suffered for your sake? However, I forgive you from my heart, since you are not dead." The Caliph, who was very much amused, demanded the reason for the joke, whereupon Abu Hassan replied, "Commander of the Faithful, I will declare to your majesty the whole truth, without the least reserve. The extravagant way in which my wife and I lived was beyond our means, and finding that our money was all gone, we were at our wits' end. At last, the shame of seeing ourselves reduced to so low a condition, and not daring to tell your majesty, made us contrive this stratagem, which we hope your majesty will be pleased to pardon, to relieve our necessities, and to divert you." The Caliph and Zebedee began to laugh at the thought of Abu Hassan's scheme. The Caliph, who had not ceased laughing at the singularity of the adventure, rising, said to Abu Hassan and his wife, "Follow me. I will give you the 1,000 pieces of gold I promised, for joy to find you are not dead." Zebedee desired him to let her make her a slave a present of the same sum for the same reason. By this means, Abu Hassan and his wife, Nuzhat al-Adawat, preserved the favor of Caliph Harun al-Rashid and the Princess Zebedee, and by their liberalities were enabled to pursue their pleasures. I thought Abu Hassan had learned his lesson the first time, when he practically bankrupted himself. But I guess not. Alright. This is the final story. I believe. Yep. The story of Khotadad and his brothers. There once lived a sultan of Haran, who was blessed with every earthly happiness. He was rich, powerful, and virtuous, and was blessed with many wives, who had given him 50 sons, all joint heirs and successors to his throne. That does not sound like a blessing. That sounds like an insanely nasty civil war. He loved them all equally, with the single exception of one son, named Khotadad, whom he hated so deeply from the day of his birth that at last he sent him, with his mother Peruz, to the court of Prince Samar, a distant but friendly monarch. Prince Samar took great care of young Khotadad's education, and taught him to ride, draw the bow, and other accomplishments befitting the son of a sultan, so that at the age of 18 years, Khotadad was looked upon as quite a prodigy. The young prince, inspired by courage worthy of his high birth, one day said to his mother, "Madam, I feel a great longing to achieve glory. Grant me leave to seek it amidst the perils of war. My father, the Sultan of Haran, has many enemies. I have resolved to offer him my services as a stranger, and not reveal who I am until I have performed some glorious action." Princess Peruz approved of her son's generous resolution, and Khotadad rode forth from Samaria, as if going to the chase, without telling his intention to Prince Samar, for fear the latter might prevent him. He was mounted on a white charger, with bit and shoes of gold. His housing was of blue satin embroidered with pearls. The hilt of his scimitar was of one single diamond. Its scabbard was of sandalwood, set with emeralds and rubies, and on his shoulder he carried his bow and quiver. Upon arriving at the city of Haran, he offered his services to the Sultan, who, charmed with his good looks, received him cordially and asked his name. "Sire," answered Khotadad, "I am the son of an emir of Grand Cairo, and learning that you were engaged in war, I have come to offer you my services." The Sultan was much pleased, and gave him a command in his army. The young prince soon distinguished himself for bravery, and rose high in the Sultan's favor. The latter constantly retained him near his person, and as a proof of his confidence, committed the other princes to his care, so that Khotadad was made governor over his own brothers. In their resentment, the princes conceived an implacable hatred against him. "Has it come to this," said they, "that the Sultan, our father, not only loves a stranger more than us, but makes him our governor to control our every action? It is not to be endured. We must rid ourselves of this foreigner." "Let us slay him," said one brother. "No, no," said another. "Let us use stratagem. We will ask his permission to go hunting, and instead we will go to some distant city and stay there. When the Sultan discovers our absence, he will blame this stranger whom he set over us, and will perhaps put him to death, or at least banish him." All the princes agreed to this, and the plan was at once carried out. After the brothers had been absent 3 days, the Sultan became alarmed. When he learned from Khotadad that he had given him permission to go hunting, he could not restrain his anger. "Indiscreet stranger," said he to Khotadad, "why did you let my sons go without accompanying them? Go, seek them immediately and bring them to me, or your life shall pay the forfeit." At these words, Khotadad felt the pangs of keenest self-reproach. "Alas, my brothers," he said to himself, "what has become of you through my fault? Have I come to the court of Haran only to increase the Sultan's anxiety?" He departed from the city, and like a shepherd who has lost his flock, searched the whole country for his brothers, inquiring at every village where they had been seen. After many days of fruitless search, he came upon a vast plain, in the midst of which was a palace of black marble. As he drew near, He beheld at a window a most beautiful lady, but with torn garments and disheveled hair. At sight of Codadad, she cried out, "Young man, flee away, I pray you. A monster inhabits this palace, who seizes, imprisons, and devours every luckless being who passes this way." "Madam," answered Codadad, "I have no fear, but who are you, and how can I aid you?" "I am a princess of Grand Cairo," answered the lady. "I was yesterday traveling to Baghdad, when the monster killed my attendants and brought me to this castle, and now he threatens my life if I will not become his wife. But once more let me beg you to escape while there is yet time." Hardly had she spoken when the giant appeared. He was of vast size and of dreadful aspect. He rode a huge Tartar horse and carried a scimitar, so heavy that none but himself could wield it. The prince, although amazed at his gigantic stature, drew his own scimitar and firmly awaited his approach. The giant, uttering a mighty roar and foaming with rage, raised himself in his stirrups and rode headlong at Codadad, swinging his terrible weapon. The prince avoided the blow by a sudden turn of his horse. The scimitar made a horrible hissing sound through the air, but before the giant had time for a second blow, Codadad struck him on his right arm with such force that he severed it, and both arm and scimitar fell to the earth together, while the giant, writhing under the violence of the blow, lost his stirrup and rolled upon the ground. The prince alighted and cut off his head. Thereupon the lady, who had witnessed the combat, uttered a cry of joy and called to Codadad, "Prince, finish the work you have begun. Take the keys of this castle, which the giant has, and deliver me out of prison." Searching the clothes of his late enemy, the prince found the keys, opened the gate of the castle, and entered a court, where he saw the lady coming to meet him. She praised his valor and extolled him above all the heroes in the world. The prince returned her compliments abundantly, for she appeared even more lovely close at hand than she had at a distance. But suddenly their conversation was interrupted by dismal cries and groans. "What do I hear?" said Codadad. "What are these sad sounds that pierce my ears?" "Prince," said the lady, "those are the lamentations of the many wretched persons chained and imprisoned in the castle dungeons. Let us hasten to give them liberty." The prince immediately descended a very steep staircase to the deep, vaulted dungeons, in which there were over 100 prisoners, chained hand and foot. "Unfortunate travelers," he said, "give thanks to heaven, which has this day delivered you from cruel death. I have slain the giant, and have come to set you free." At these words the prisoners gave a shout of mingled joy and surprise, while Codadad and the lady hastened to remove their fetters. When they had all come out from the dungeon into the court, under the light of day, the prince's surprise was as great as his joy to see among the prisoners the very men whom he was seeking. "Princes," cried he, "is it really you whom I behold? May I hope to restore you to the Sultan your father, who is inconsolable over your loss? Are you all here alive?" The 49 princes all made themselves known to Codadad, and in common with the other prisoners expressed unbounded gratitude for their deliverance. Codadad, with their help, searched the whole castle and found a vast store of hidden treasure, curious silks, gold brocades, Persian carpets, China silks, and an infinite variety of other goods, which the giant had taken from the caravans he plundered, and some part of which was the property of the released prisoners. The prince restored to them their own, and divided the rest of the treasure equally among them all. Proceeding from the castle to the stables, they found many stolen camels and horses, among them the horses belonging to the Sultan of Harran's sons. The merchants, overjoyed at recovering their goods and camels, as well as their liberty, hastened to continue on their various ways. When they were gone, Codadad, turning to the lady, said, "If you will tell us, madam, where you wish to go, from here these princes and I will be glad to attend you. Will you not honor us with the story of your adventures?" Thereupon the lady began the following recital. In the great city of Deryabar there ruled a powerful and good sultan. He wanted only one thing to make him perfectly happy, and that was a child. He constantly prayed heaven for the blessing of a son, but his prayer was granted only in part, as the queen, his wife, gave birth to a daughter. I am that daughter. My father was grieved, but resigned himself to the will of God, and had me educated so that I might become a worthy successor to his crown. One day, when hunting, my father lost his way, and rode deep into the forest until overtaken by night. Making his way toward a faint light which shone from a hut among the trees, he found a gigantic man seated on a carpet with a huge pitcher of wine before him, and a whole ox roasting before the fire. More surprising still, there was also a beautiful woman in the hut, who seemed overwhelmed with grief, and at her feet was a little boy who cried without stopping. My father waited outside the hut. Before long, the giant, having emptied the pitcher and eaten about half the ox, seized the unhappy lady by the hair, and drawing his scimitar, was about to strike off her head, when my father shot an arrow which pierced the giant's breast, and laid him dead upon the floor. My father entered the hut, unbound the lady's hands, and inquired who she was and how she had come to this place. "My lord," she said, "my husband is a Saracen prince, ruling over certain seacoast tribes. One day, when we were traveling through our dominions, my child and I became separated from the prince, and this giant surprised us and carried us off to the forest. He was about to kill me because I refused to become his wife. My father pitied the lady in her distress, and told her that he would guide her the next day to the city of Daryabar, of which he was sultan, and that she was welcome to lodge at the palace until her husband came to claim her. The Saracen lady accepted the offer, and the next day she accompanied my father, who found all his retinue anxiously waiting at the edge of the wood, after having spent a fruitless night in search of him. Upon arriving at the palace, my father assigned an apartment to the beautiful Saracen lady, and arranged that her little son should be carefully educated. In course of time the boy grew up, tall and handsome and clever, and my father became much attached to him. All the courtiers perceived this, and predicted that the young man might aspire to be my husband. Encouraged by such gossip, the young man forgot the distance between our stations, and boldly asked the Sultan for my hand. My father told him that he had other plans for me. The youth was so angry at this refusal that with basest ingratitude he murdered my father, and caused himself to be proclaimed Sultan of Daryabar. Next, he came to my apartment at the head of the conspirators to take my life or oblige me to marry him. The Grand Vizier, however, always loyal to my father, carried me from the palace to a place of safety until he could find a boat on which we presently set sail from the island. We had been but a few days at sea when a furious storm arose, and our vessel was dashed to pieces on the rocks. The Grand Vizier and all my attendants were swallowed up by the sea. By what miracle I was saved, I know not, but when my senses returned, I found myself on shore. I was so overcome with the sense of my utter loneliness that I resolved to cast myself back into the sea, when I heard behind me a great noise of men and horses. Turning about, I saw several armed horsemen, one of whom was conspicuous above the rest in his dress and manner. He was mounted on an Arabian horse. His garments were embroidered in silver, and on his head was a golden crown. He gazed at me earnestly, and seeing that I had been weeping, he begged me not to give way to despair. "My palace," he said, "is at your service. You shall live with the queen my mother, who will show you every kindness. I do not know who you are, yet I am already deeply interested in your welfare." I thanked the young sultan for his kindness, and to prove that I was not unworthy of it, I told him of my rank and of my misfortunes. The prince at once took me to the queen, his mother, who soon became extremely fond of me. Presently her son offered me himself and his crown, and our marriage was celebrated with all imaginable splendor. In the midst of these celebrations, a formidable enemy, the king of Zangobar, made a night attack on our kingdom with great number of troops, and nearly captured us both. We escaped, however, and reached the seacoast, where we set sail in a fishing boat. On the third day we were overtaken by a pirate ship, and when it came alongside, 5 or 6 armed pirates leapt into our boat, bound the prince, and cast him into the sea before my eyes. They then took me on board their own ship, and instead of casting lots, they quarreled over me and fought like madmen. At last, they were all killed but one, who said to me, "Now you are mine. I will carry you to Grand Cairo and sell you to a friend of mine who wants a beautiful slave. We're on our way to Grand Cairo when the giant killed the pirate and took me to his black castle, from which he rescued me. When the princess finished the story of her adventures, Codadad said, "Happily, madam, your troubles are now over. The Sultan of Harran's sons offer you safe escort to their father's court. And if you do not disdain the hand of your rescuer, let me offer it to you, and let all these princes be witnesses." I mean, shouldn't you be at least a little concerned about, like, the ill luck that accompanies those who would be her husband? Just a tiny bit. Seems like a bad plan after that story. And the next page has an illustration of men sneaking into a tent with daggers. So I'm going to go with yes. Yes, it goes badly. The princess consented, and the marriage took place that very day, after which they all set out for the Sultan of Harran's court. After they had traveled several days, and were within 1 day's journey of Harran, Codadad said, "Princes, I have too long concealed from you my true history. I am your brother Codadad. The Sultan of Harran is my father, and the Princess Peruz is my mother." The Princess Daryabar and all the princes congratulated Codadad on his birth with every appearance of the keenest joy. But in reality, the hatred of the 49 brothers was redoubled. They met secretly that night, while Codadad and his princess lay asleep in their tent, and forgetting that they owed him their lives, agreed among themselves to murder him. "We have no other choice," said they, "for the moment that our father learns that this stranger, of whom he is so fond, is our brother, he will proclaim him heir to the throne." Accordingly, they immediately surrounded the tent in which Codadad slept, stabbed him repeatedly, and left him for dead in the arms of the Princess Daryabar. The princess rent the air with her frantic cries, tore her hair, and her tears rained down upon her husband's body. But presently, observing that Codadad still breathed, she left the tent to look for help, and met 2 travelers who willingly agreed to help her. But on returning with her, they could nowhere find Codadad, and were forced to conclude that he had been dragged away by some wild beast. Having at last persuaded the unhappy princess to tell them her history, the travelers advised her that it was her duty as a wife to continue at once to the court of the Sultan of Harran. "He is a good and just prince," they said. "You need only tell him how Prince Codadad has been treated by his brothers, and he will surely do you justice." "I will follow your advice," replied the princess. "It is my duty to avenge Codadad's death, and since you are so generous as to offer to escort me, I am ready to set out." They halted at the first caravanserai that they reached, on the road to Harran, and inquired of the host the latest news at court. "It is," said the host, "in very great perplexity. The Sultan had a son who lived long with him as a stranger, but has disappeared, and none can tell him what has become of him. One of the Sultan's wives, named Peruz, is his mother, and is now at Harran making all possible inquiry, but in vain. Everyone is heartbroken at the loss of this prince. None of the Sultan's 49 other sons can console him for the death of Codadad." Upon hearing this, the 2 travelers agreed that one of them should remain with the princess, while the other went on to the city and obtained an interview with Peruz. As this latter traveler was approaching the palace, he beheld a lady mounted on a richly caparisoned mule, followed by several other mounted ladies, with a great number of guards and slaves. The traveler asked a bystander whether the lady was one of the Sultan's wives. "Yes," answered the bystander, "and much honored and beloved by the people, because she is the mother of the lost Prince Codadad." The traveler asked no more questions, but followed Peruz to a mosque, where public prayers were being offered for the safe return of Codadad. When the prayers were over, the traveler approached one of the slaves and whispered in his ear, "Brother, I have a secret of great importance to impart to the Princess Peruz. It concerns the Prince Codadad." "If that be so," said the slave, follow us to the palace, and you shall have an opportunity." Accordingly, the traveler followed them, and the slave immediately conducted him into the princess's closet, and after humbly prostrating himself, he related all the details of what had passed between Codadad and his brothers. The mother listened with eager attention, but when he came to speak of the murder, she fainted away and fell back on her sofa as though she herself had been stabbed. When her women had restored her to herself, Behrouz said to the traveler, "Go back to the Princess of Deryabar and assure her from me that the Sultan will receive her as his daughter-in-law. As for yourself, your services shall be richly rewarded." When the Sultan learned from Behrouz the story of the inhuman manner in which Codadad had been murdered by his brothers, he was transported with anger, and summoning his Grand Vizier, "Hassan," said he, "go immediately, take 1,000 of my guards, and seize all the princes, my sons. Shut them up in the safest tower, and let this be done at once." The Grand Vizier, without uttering a word, laid his hand on his head in token of obedience, and hastened away to execute his orders. When the Grand Vizier presently returned to announce that all 49 princes had been seized and imprisoned, the Sultan said, "I have further commands for you. Go to the caravanserai where the Princess of Deryabar and the 2 travelers are lodged, and conduct them with all due honor to my palace." Upon her arrival, the Princess of Deryabar found the Sultan at the palace gate, waiting to receive her. He took her by the hand and led her to Behrouz's apartment, where all 3 gave way to their grief, and mingled their tears and sighs. At length, the Princess of Deryabar, having somewhat recovered, related the adventure with the giant, and Codadad's subsequent fate, and demanded justice for the treachery of the princes. "Assuredly," said the Sultan, "those ungrateful brothers shall atone for their crimes with their lives. But Codadad's death must first be made public, and although my son's body is missing, we shall nevertheless pay him the last solemn tribute." Summoning his Grand Vizier, he ordered him to have erected a dome of white marble on the plain where the city of Haran stands. Hassan urged on the work with such diligence that the dome was soon finished. Within it was erected a tomb covered with gold brocade. When all was completed, the Sultan appointed a day for the celebration of his son's funeral rites. The impressive ceremony was conducted with the greatest pomp and magnificence, after which there were public prayers in all the mosques for a period of 8 days. On the 9th day, the Sultan decreed that the 49 princes should be executed. The scaffolds were already being erected when a stay of execution was ordered, because news had come that some neighboring rulers, who had already made war on the Sultan of Haran, were again advancing on the city with a greater force than ever. This news occasioned general consternation, and gave everyone fresh cause to lament the loss of Codadad. "Alas," said the people, "if the brave Codadad were alive, we should have small fear of the enemy who is advancing against us." The Sultan valiantly placed himself at the head of his troops and went out to meet the foe. The struggle was long and fierce, and much blood was shed on both sides. At last, just as victory seemed to favor the enemy, a great body of fresh cavalry appeared on the plain and fell upon the enemy's flank with such a furious charge that they not only routed them, but followed after and cut most of them in pieces. The Sultan of Haran, who had closely watched the battle, admired the bravery of this strange body of cavalry, whose unhoped-for arrival had changed defeat into victory. But above all, he longed to know the name of the generous hero who had fought with such extraordinary valor. Impatient to meet and thank him, he hurried forward to meet the stranger, and to his joyful amazement recognized in the brave warrior his lost son, Codadad. "Oh, my son," cried the Sultan, "is it possible that you are restored to me? Alas, I despaired of ever seeing you again. But never fear, you shall be amply revenged tomorrow." "Sire," said Codadad, "how did you learn that I am your son? Have my brothers repented and told you who I am?" "No," answered the Sultan. "It is the Princess of Deryabar who has told us everything, for she is at the palace demanding justice against your brothers. And with her is your mother, the Princess Behrouz, who came seeking everywhere news of you." The Sultan and his recovered son hastened back to the palace, where they found Behrouz and her daughter-in-law waiting to congratulate the Sultan upon his victory. but words cannot express the transports of joy they felt when they saw the young prince with him. Presently, when their first excitement was calmed, they asked Codadad by what miracle he came to be still alive. He answered that a peasant who chanced to pass the tent, and found him senseless and dangerously wounded, had strapped him upon his mule, and carried him to his house where, with the help of certain wild herbs, he had cured him. I was on my way back to Haran, continued Codadad, when I learned that the enemy was marching on the city. So I made myself known to the inhabitants as I passed along, and gathered a great number of young horsemen in your defense. Luckily, I happened to arrive in time. When Codadad had finished, the Sultan said, "Let us return thanks to God for having preserved Codadad, but the traitors who sought his life must perish." "Sire," answered the generous prince, "even though my brothers are ungrateful, remember that they are your sons and my brothers. For myself, I freely forgive their offense, and I pray you also to pardon them." This generosity drew tears from the Sultan. He immediately caused all the people to be assembled, and publicly declared Codadad his heir. He then ordered the imprisoned princes to be brought forth, loaded down with their chains. Codadad struck off their chains, and embraced them all with so much sincerity and affection that the people were all charmed with his generosity, and the wicked brothers themselves repented and resolved henceforth to give him loyal devotion. The Sultan of the Indies could not fail to admire the prodigious store of interesting stories with which the Sultana had whiled away the time through 1,001 nights. He also admired the courage which had inspired her to offer to become his wife, and for her sake his stern vow was relaxed, so that he could not bear to put her to death. "I confess, my lovely Scheherazade," said he, "that your wit has disarmed me. For your sweet sake, I renounce my terrible vow to slay a woman every day, and for that reason you shall ever be remembered as the deliverer of the maidens who would have fallen victims to my wrath, which I now know to be unjust." The Sultana cast herself at his feet, and embraced him with the most warm affection and gratitude. The Grand Vizier was the first who learned these glad tidings, which he caused to be quickly spread through every province and town of the empire, so that the fair Scheherazade won the blessing of everyone throughout the country. The Sultan lived happily with his lovely Sultana, and their names were loved and respected throughout the wide territory of the Empire of the Indies. The end. And they lived happily forever after. Now we definitely need to pick some new books. And the end, yes. I mean, it did close pretty quickly. The Codadad story just ended, and then like 2 paragraphs and the book's over. I'm glad you liked it, Gecko. Oh, but yeah, what I like is how the patterns layer on each other, and it makes unpredictable designs. Because if you look at the like patterns on the app that controls it, you just see like what the pattern would be by itself, but not what it looks like one after another after another. Oh. Oh, by the way, there will not be a stream tomorrow. I've got some things to do in the morning, and I am not going to be available to stream. So I'm sorry about that. The next stream will be Wednesday. I hope you all can forgive me, but I do have things that I do need to do. They are family obligations. Well, thank you. I'm telling you, tea is not breathable. Somehow I keep forgetting that and having to remind myself. Oh, don't breathe the tea. It's a bad plan. Don't do it. I don't know why I keep doing it. It does hurt. It is very painful. Ow. All right. Well, I have a sour-faced little dude because I'm not streaming tomorrow. Well, tell him I'm sorry, but family's important. Oh, it's because he can't stay up late. Hmm. I mean, I suppose I could start doing my streams earlier in the morning. What do you think? If I moved it up 2 hours, then he could go to bed 2 hours earlier on Fridays and Saturdays? What do you think? That sound like a good plan, little dude? I mean, I wouldn't want to keep you up too late. I wish I could see his face right now. Aw. Well, tell him what I said. I want to know what face he makes. I am not evil. How am I evil? I'm hurt. So hurt. How could you think that I was evil? All right. Let's go ahead and bring up the ending screen, and then we'll go raid an Alex. Straight face and ran from the room. Oh. Tell him I won't change the time. Poor little guy. Oh, man. All right, let's go get Alex. All right. Thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoyed the story, and I will see you on Wednesday.